Thank you, 6-gallon hat. Thank you very much. 6-gallon hat. Old Time Fiddler what?
The Rim Country chapter of the Old Time Fiddle Association.
What she said.
6-gallon hat.
Rim chapter.
Where's the hat?
Da-da-da-da-da.
I got a
Yeah, the
four.
hat's up there. The hat at home.
Arizona chapter, the Old Time Fiddler Association. Yeah, there you go. My name's Bruce Wales. I've been emceeing this for a little while now. This is our 14th year of having the public reading of the Declaration of Independence here in Payson, Arizona. I am told, I think we're up to like 46 people. You guys can count them when you aren't, while your ears are listening, your eyes can wander. That's fine. And I think we've been told we're not supposed to exceed 50. Keep in mind it is Independence Day. Yeah, I just stirred up a whole protest, didn't I? Now, there's a couple things I want to mention first. We try so hard to turn occasions into a regular thing that we forget about the spontaneity. And today is unique in many, many different ways. And I want to tell you why. I put together a little piece, and Teresa, I forget her name, Curry or Persa, whatever the reporter's name is, she did a nice job of taking my words and putting them into the roundup about 2 weeks ago, a week ago Tuesday, talking about what was going to happen today and how we were going to try to follow the mayor's directives, making sure everybody was 6 feet apart, unless of course you're partners, you've been closer to that all your life. And there would be hand cleaner, there's some over on the table here, and everybody was asked to bring their own mask, their own blankets, their own chairs and stuff. And then all of a sudden, yesterday in the Friday edition, we're told that we have to go down to get a permit. That I did not get. We don't have a permit to gather. So we're not current. Guess what? The mayor is not current. You know why? Last night I saw this real calm announcement from the WHO, the World Health Organization. They didn't come out with banners. They didn't come out with, gee, we're sorry, we misled everybody. They just said, asymptomatic people cannot spread COVID. They didn't say we've been messing with world economies accidentally. They didn't say, by the way, all you presidents and governors and kings, you should reverse your decisions. We're really, really sorry. They just said, by the way, asymptomatic people cannot spread COVID.
I'm looking for shade.
Think about that.
I'm looking for shade.
Just, doesn't that make you shudder?
Mm-hmm.
Now, is everybody going to say, we better change course? I'll bet you everybody's going to say, nope, policy is policy.
Now you're immortalized.
We can't disrupt what we've been doing.
What?
Let's see how
Now
they
you are
stay current with the
immortalized on
times.
video.
Oh, I am. Oh, good.
Go ahead, check your iPhones, check your smartphones. Go ahead, look it up. What did the World Health Organization say? Check me
Sorry
out.
about that.
Just calm stuff. Isn't that interesting? So here we are trying to stay current. Thank that band for being just so, spontaneous. Wasn't that cool? That was so neat. Yeah. We were going to play some patriotic music and I got carried away being spontaneous. Okay. Hey, I'm going to go ahead and start with, I think we're on time, right, Bert?
Here's the mayor.
Okay. We're going to start, I'm going to introduce the founder of
think
this
that's
whole
him,
thing.
isn't
He
it?
and Bill Sano,
Isn't that,
Colonel Bill
Mayor
Sano.
Morrissey right
And of
there?
course, our founder
Yeah,
here,
looks
he
like
worked with Bill Sano putting this together. Bill Sano works with the Payson Events Committee, and they were trying to put together what can we do to get people involved and stuff like that. And they had found these, Bill Sano mentioned, I guess, to Lou Levinson is the man I'm going to introduce. that they had these kids that recited the Declaration of Independence. They were in their young teens, if I remember right. I came, I think it was the second or third year. It put tears in my eyes. It was phenomenal. And it was at that point where I volunteered to be a part of this organization. And Lou was putting it together. So I want retired Navy Commander Lou Levinson to come up and give a few words, and I think he has some ideas as to what's going to happen in the future, and you may want to meet with him later at one of the tables to talk about some other things later too. Everybody welcome please our founder Lou Levinson.
Thank you, Bruce. Wow, I haven't had one like that forever. Anyhow, I'm pleased to be here again. I think we've got a great thing going. I'm so glad that there's so many of you. Who? Sorry. Hey, I'm trainable. I know. One of my handicaps. To my train of thought, I think what we have here is a demonstration because you have come of your own inherent opportunity to be free and independent, more so than all those other people who are just staying at home because, oh no, they said we had the virus or something, you know? I will have more to say on that should any of you choose to want to talk with me after the program that Bruce has lined up, which I very much want to hear. Thank you.
Well, it's a good thing Bruce Wales is not in politics, huh? Because I just put my foot in my mouth. I'd like to introduce our mayor, Tom Morrissey.
Thank you, Patriots. I am so happy to be here. I'm so proud of you all for coming out for the reading of the Declaration of Independence. It seems to have gotten lost in our school programs. We're not teaching history, and our youngsters don't understand the price that the founders paid for the freedom that we enjoy today. And we are being challenged today by people who want to take our country down. So it's up to us, we the people. We are the ones who hold the power, and we are the ones who will save our country. And doing events like we're doing here, it helps enormously. It brings a warmth to the heart of all of us who are patriots, who love our country, and who are going to stand together and preserve our country no matter what the price is. Just as the framers did back in the days when they brought this country into being. So God bless you all. I thank you, I salute you, and I pray for our country, and I stand with you. God bless you.
Thank you, Mayor Morrissey. Next up, I'd like to introduce, we're going to get into the meat of our program here. What was a lot of you women, I'm guessing, are familiar with pregnancy, one way or another. A lot of you men, too, you probably suffered some sympathetic birth pangs, whether you liked it or not. Our country went through a long pregnancy. And even today, as a lot of people understand what's going on and they agree and they see the enemy for what it is, I'm sure King George or whoever that was over in Great Britain, he wasn't wearing a sign that said, by the way, I'm a tyrant. A lot of people didn't see him for who he was. A lot of people disagreed. I don't know what the ratio was, whether it was a third were for the revolution and a third were against and a third didn't care. I don't know. I can't read the minds of people long dead and buried. But we've got that today. A lot of people can identify what's going on. A lot of people disagree. A lot of people can't see what's going on. And a lot of people are saying, hey, I'm going to be dead and buried soon anyway, I don't care. But there was quite a pregnancy, a long pregnancy going on there of how our country came to be. And our next speaker, Perry Klein, is going to speak about that. Perry?
Thank you, Bruce. The Declaration of Independence was not written on a whim or in response to perceived injustices, but after many years of oppression by the British King and Parliament. Life in the colonies was not easy, but the colonists had carved out a good life in the New World. By 1763, the French and Indian War was over, and an economic slump followed. So the King and Parliament decided they would dip into the colonists' pockets. In 1764, the Sugar Act and the Currency Act were passed and were highly resented by the colonists. These acts were protested, and the protests were ignored by the King and the Parliament. The following year, more acts were passed, including the Stamp Act to help defray the costs of keeping troops in America. This act imposed a tax on many types of printed materials used by the colonies and seen by the colonists as a violation of their rights. Violent demonstrations in several colonies ensued, and the Virginian House of Burgesses adopted the Virginia Resolves that proclaimed, under British law, Virginians could only be taxed by an assembly to which they had elected representatives. Most of the protests fell on deaf ears, and the King and Parliament continued with further insults, including enacting the Quartering Act, forcing colonists to house, feed, and provide other provisions to the British troops. An act that was mostly resisted or circumvented in many of the colonies. In 1767, the Townshend Acts were passed by Parliament, placing duties on many items imported into America. By this time, protests were mounting and leaders evolving. The Massachusetts House of Representatives began a campaign against the acts by sending a petition to the King asking for the repeal of the acts. At the same time, the Massachusetts House sent the Massachusetts Circular Letter to other colonial assemblies, asking them to join the resistance movement, and called for a boycott of merchants importing the affected goods. This action came to the notice of Lord Hillsborough, the new colonial secretary in England. His response was to send letters to the colonial governors, British appointees, instructing them to dissolve any colonial assemblies elected by the colonists that responded to the circular letter. He also instructed the Massachusetts governor, Francis Bernard, to direct the Massachusetts House to rescind the letter. The House refused to comply. Slowly, other assemblies began to support the letter and the boycott of British goods. By September of 1768, at a town meeting in Boston, the town residents were urged to arm themselves. Later, in September, 2 regiments of English infantry landed in Boston and set up permanent residence to keep order. There were several more skirmishes over the next year or so. The most notable was the Boston Massacre in March of 1770. The Boston Massacre started with an apprentice harassing a soldier on guard duty. It quickly escalated with more citizens and troops joining in the fray. A soldier overreacted and began to shoot at the citizens without an order from the commanding officer, who had been sent to control the situation. It was estimated by this time there were 300 to 400 people there. 11 men were hit, 3 died instantly, 3 more were fatally wounded. Most of the crowd moved away from the immediate area, but continued to grow in the nearby streets. The commanding officer called out most of the regiment, and the acting governor, Thomas Hutchinson, was called to the scene. He assured the crowd a fair inquiry into the shootings if the crowd dispersed. An investigation was done, and the 8 soldiers, the commanding officer on the scene, and 4 civilians were indicted for murder. The trial was delayed and the regiment was moved out of the province because of the ongoing high tensions in Boston. Not content with the slow-moving justice, the local media and engravers published accounts of the massacre and artistic interpretations of the scene. The media at the time were more interested in stirring up the colonists than total accuracy. One example was the complaint that customs officials were abandoning their posts because of the danger, when in fact only one official left Boston to carry Governor Hutchinson's dispatches about the situation to London. Many of the dispatches sought to blame Bostonians for denying the validity of parliamentary laws. The dispatches also blamed the city citizens for the lawlessness preceding the event, claiming that they set up an ambush of the soldiers. The trial of the soldiers opened in November of 1770. A number of the defendants were defended by John Adams. 6 were acquitted, and 2 were found guilty of manslaughter because there was overwhelming evidence they had fired directly into the crowd. Over the next 5 years, there were further conflicts, including the best known, the Boston Tea Party, in December of 1773. The target was the Tea Act, which allowed the British East India Company to sell tea from China in American colonies without paying taxes apart from those imposed by the Townshend Acts. American patriots strongly opposed the taxes in the Townshend Act as a violation of their rights. Colonists objected to the Tea Act because they believed in that violated their rights as Englishmen to no taxation without representation. The colonists believed they could only be taxed by their own elected representatives, not by a British Parliament in which they were not represented. Demonstrators, some disguised as Native Americans, destroyed an entire shipment of tea sent by the East India Company. They boarded the ships and threw the chests of tea into the Boston harbor. The British government responded harshly, and the episode escalated into the American Revolution. 4 months later, April 19, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord were the start of the Revolutionary War. The British were concerned about the powder and weapons that the colonists had acquired and set out to seize and destroy the caches of weapons. This incident was later termed the shot heard round the world. And to this day, it is not known exactly who fired that shot. The citizens met the redcoats and proceeded to defend their rights. The Revolutionary Army harassed the retreating British infantry all the way to Boston, using every tree and rock to hide behind to shoot at the marching infantry. There were more skirmishes with wins on both sides, and in May of 1775, the Second Continental Congress met. The people really didn't wish to fight with King George. They preferred to be considered British citizens and accorded all the rights of the British citizens of England. The King, in late 1775, rejected the request to repeal the Coercive Acts, a series of intolerable laws passed by the Parliament. The King wrote to Prime Minister Lord North, "Blows must decide whether they are to be subject to this country or independent." The King was determined to enforce parliamentary supremacy in America. The colonists objected. Some delegates to the Second Continental Congress hoped for eventual independence, but few actively advocated for that path. They still hoped to reconcile with the King, but the second petition was rejected. King George issued a proclamation of rebellion and announced before Parliament in October 1775 that he was considering friendly offers of foreign assistance to suppress the rebellion. In January of 1776, Thomas Paine published his pamphlet, Common Sense, as it was becoming clear in the colonies that the king was not inclined to act as a conciliator. Paine argued for independence and advocated a republican form of government as an alternative to monarchy and hereditary rule. The publication of this pamphlet greatly increased public support for separation from Great Britain, especially after Parliament passed the Prohibitory Act, which established a blockade of American ports and declared American ships to be enemy vessels. John Adams believed that Parliament had effectively declared American independence with this act. Support for declaring independence grew even more when it was confirmed that King George had hired German mercenaries to use against his American subjects. Congress, unfortunately, did not have clear authority to declare independence. Many delegates returned to their colonial homes to advocate for the authority to do so. Meanwhile, Congress appointed a committee to draft a preamble to explain the purpose of the resolution. John Adams wrote the preamble, which stated that King George had rejected reconciliation and was hiring mercenaries to suppress the rebellion in the colonies. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia presented a three-part resolution to the Congress on June 7th. John Adams seconded the resolution and called upon Congress to declare independence. It was Lee's resolution that became the basis for much of the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. It read in part, "Resolved, these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from the allegiance to the British Crown, and all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved." There was much debate about this resolution, but eventually Congress decided that a committee could prepare a document announcing and explaining independence in the event that Lee's resolution was approved when it was brought up again in July. The various delegates returned to their local governments for further instructions and approvals. By the end of June, most of the colonies had endorsed the proposed concept of declaring independence, so a committee of 5 was formed to draft the declaration. No committee notes were taken, so later accounts were contradictory. It is known that Thomas Jefferson was chosen to write the first draft. The document listed 27 separate colonial grievances against King George III and asserted natural and legal rights, including revolution. The committee presented the document to Congress on June 28, 1776, and Congress edited the document over the next 2 days, shortening the document, removing unnecessary wording, and improving sentence structure. After more speeches, the vote was taken, and on July 2nd, 1776, the Resolution of Independence was adopted, and the colonies officially severed political ties with Great Britain. Several more changes were made to the wording of the Declaration of Independence, and this document was approved on July 4th, 1776.
Thank you, Perry. Long way to get there today. Took our forefathers a lot longer, huh? Our next speaker has long wanted to do this, and I don't blame him because I've long wanted to read it myself in public. Oh, you've done it before? Then let me do it. No. This is the jewel of today. The Declaration of Independence is what we all came to do, all came to hear. And yeah, Declaration of Independence. I give you a man, Gary Bedsworth, once an honorary brigadier general, for being one of the cuisine artists in 2 branches of our service. Mr. Gary Bedsworth.
Thank you, and welcome. And thank you, Perry, for that history. I wish that the history of the United States was more clearly emphasized in the teachings of today, because we lose much in our memory when we don't recall what has happened in our past. It is a privilege for me today to repeat to you the actions of the Second Continental Congress, July 4th, 1776. The unanimous declaration of 13 United States of America. Within the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. In decent respect to these opinions, our mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident: that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed, and whenever any form of this government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on the principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them should be most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that this government, long established, should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experiences hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing inevitably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries, usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused the assent of laws, and most wholesomely the necessary for the public good. He wouldn't allow them. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operations till assent could be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable only to tyrants. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved the representative of houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected. Thereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state remaining in the meantime exposed to all dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for the purpose of obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the condition of new appropriation and erasing the provision of new appropriation of land. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary power. He has made the judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their office, for the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices, sent hither swarms of its officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of legislators. He is affected to render the military independent of and superior to civil power. He has combined with others to acknowledge us a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders that they should have committed on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example of a fit instrument for introducing the same rule in these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and adhering fundamentally to the forms of our government, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring ourselves invested with the power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas and ravaged our coasts and burned our towns and destroyed the lives of our people. He is, at this time, transporting a large army of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, dissolution, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages in the past. This is totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall to death at their own hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by retreated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which can define a tyrant is unfit to rule a free people. Nor have we been waiting in attention to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. We have conjured them by ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connection and our correspondence. They too have been deaf to the violence of justice, to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and holds them, as we hold the rest of the mankind, enemies in war and peace. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the supreme judges of the world for rectitude of our intentions, do in name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies and are and of right ought to be free and independent states that are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connections between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that we are free and independent states. They have full power to levy war, conduct peace, contract alliances, establish Congress, and do other acts and things which independent states may have the right to do. And for the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Excellent. Keep in mind, that was after the person who was scheduled to do that called and canceled last night. Thank you, sir. And now I'd like to call up a person who you know him as that guy on the radio, but I also want to let you know that he's a senior disaster response and telemedicine expert consultant, Mr. Randy Roberson. Come on up, Randy.
Well, we've heard the Declaration of Independence. We heard a little bit of the history that went on before that. But have you ever wondered what happened to the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence? I know I and probably many of you here have had the opportunity to visit other countries and see contrastingly different societies and the way things are taken care of. And I, for one, have gotten down on my knees and kissed the tarmac before coming back. We have a very special place here. But so what did happen to the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence? Did they sign this magical piece of paper and then, like in the fairy tales we remember from our youth, did they just go off and live happily ever after? Well, the truth of what happened to them was quite far from happily ever after. 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors, and they were tortured to death. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons serving in the Revolutionary War. and two had their sons captured. And another had two of their sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or hardships of the Revolutionary War. They signed and they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and as we heard, their sacred honor. So, what kind of men were they? 24 were lawyers and jurists. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers and large plantation owners. These were men of means. These were well-educated people. But they signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well that the penalty would be death if they were captured. Carter Braxton of Virginia, a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ship swept from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts, and he died in rags. Thomas McKean was so hounded by the British that he was forced to move his family almost constantly. He served in the Congress without pay, and his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and poverty was his reward. Vandals or soldiers looted the properties of Dillery, Hall, Clymer, Walton, Gwinnett, Hayward, Rutledge, and Middleton. At the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British General Cornwallis had taken over the Nelson home from his headquarters. Thomas Nelson quietly urged General George Washington to go ahead and open fire. His own home was destroyed, and Nelson died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and property destroyed. The enemy jailed his wife, and he died within a few months. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she lay dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and his gristmill were laid to waste. For more than a year, he lived in the forest and in caves, returning home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. A few weeks later, he died from exhaustion as well as a broken heart. Norris and Livingston suffered similar fates. Such were the stories and the sacrifices of the American Revolution. Now, these were not wild-eyed, rabble-rousing ruffians. They were soft-spoken men of means that were educated. They had security, but they valued liberty even more. Standing tall, straight, and unwavering, they pledged, quote, "For the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honors." They gave you and me a free, independent America. The history books never told you a lot about what happened in the Revolutionary War. You know, we didn't just fight the British. We were British subjects at the time, and we fought our own government. Some of us take these liberties that we enjoy today so much for granted, and we shouldn't. We weren't able to live happily ever after, but they weren't rather able to live happily ever after, but they left us a constitutional republic where in many ways today we can. So take a couple of minutes to remember all their sacrifices so we could all live in this free country. Freedom is never really free, but I hope you'll take a few moments while enjoying your 4th of July holiday weekend and reflect not only on those patriots, but especially on the men and women that have sacrificed their lives during all of our nation's conflicts and those that, even today, are fighting to keep it free for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. This is that last chance I get to pontificate, I think is the word. Stand by with that patriotic music, okay? I counted 81 of us, even the people sitting way back there, over there at the museum. Somebody's sitting on their car a little bit ago. Not a lot of folks, but I'm going to say the important folks. Give yourselves a big hand, huh? Happy Independence Day. And thanks to the crew here, the staff, if we can call them that. Usually we begin 4th of July over there with the town co-sponsoring and park support. And over there at the memorial, and there's the sign that says, "Freedom isn't free." It's not something you do as, kind of a hobby. It's a part of your fiber. you learn about it, and you do it somehow or other. I won't go preaching about that. But the way I summarize typically, and I just gave the mayor when we were saying goodbye to him because he had to leave, and I told him what I usually say at the end of these days, these 4th of July, Independence Day things, is that our founders realized from the get-go that men are not angels. I think that's one of the quotes that gets thrown around about with the founders. And so when they decided to put together the self-governing apparatus and they constituted the government, that would be the Constitution that comes along later, they realized that men, human beings, are 100% free, but they need to be 100% accountable. And none of us are real good at being 100% accountable. Not you, not I. Yes, we have consciences, and religions in every way try to deal with this same conundrum: how to be free, how to have liberty, and yet how to be accountable. So they constituted a government, and they made the Constitution, which is the rules as to how our government's supposed to work. They even put together the Bill of Rights to make sure that the government understands it. By the way, you can't take away, fill in the blanks, freedom of speech, right to assemble, Second Amendment, blah, 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 blah. You know, they just highlighted that. And now I challenge anybody to say they've read the Constitution, because they haven't even printed it since 2012, because the courts have added on so many, they haven't even printed it. Over there on the table, you'll see something about Convention of States. It's the Article 5 of the Constitution that says when 2/3 of the states get together, they can put amendments to the Constitution that can change things. Convention of States have agreed on 3 items where they can come in and limit federal authority. They can fiscal responsibility and term limits. That's their movement. They're about halfway there. That might be something you might want to get involved in, because that Constitution, that's going crazy. Our founders didn't want that. That's something you might want to look into. Limited government. So, we tried to make a babysitter, namely the government, to keep us accountable, to keep us free. That's gone nuts. All we want to do is be free and be accountable. That's all the founders wanted. That's all we want. Okay? How about our Second Amendment? There's some information over there. Some people that can help us. How about people that go to bat for us at legislature in our state, that keep us aware of, hey, you guys, they're trying to slip one in on us. Arizona Citizens Defense League, Don, our camera guy over there, he knows all about that. He'll be standing over there. He'll be able to get you some information if you want to get in on a call list, or if you just want to donate money, something. They're kind of being watchdogs. They can kind of keep us informed. What can we do to, hey, you guys, they're submarining us here. We just want to be 100% free and 100% accountable. That's all we want. But these guys are submarining us. There are other things. New beginnings. People that are trying to take away the lives of Americans that are just barely born. How can we help that movement? There are people over at these tables that can help wake us up to how can we all be free and all be accountable. Simple. This is in some churches, this would be the call to the altar time, right? Okay. So Americans, we're independent. Let's fight to keep us all that way. This is where we cue the patriotic music. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming in.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad
just going to let that music run while Don makes an announcement here.
I wanted to report on some of the ways that our government has destroyed or tried its best to destroy the Constitution of the United States. The first thing is that we had a president a long time ago by the name of Woodrow Wilson, who was a devout communist and admitted it. His Secretary of State that he appointed, William Jennings Bryan, was a devout communist, and he admitted it, and introduced into the, like an Article 5 convention, was the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment deprives the states of their suffrage in the Senate. The states created the federal government to begin with, but it deprives the states of their suffrage in the Senate, turns the U.S. Senate over to the people like another House of Representatives. The 17th Amendment was specifically, categorically, flagrantly violated by the Article, or I should say Article 5 was egregiously violated by the 17th Amendment because Article 5 specifically prohibits any amendment which deprives the people of their suffrage in the Senate, deprives the states of their suffrage in the Senate. Specifically prohibits it unless every state agreed. 10 states did not agree. 10 states withheld their consent. 10 states rejected the 17th Amendment. One state, I believe it was California, was even declared by William Jennings Bryan to have ratified the 17th Amendment before the amendment had even gotten into committee to be considered. The whole thing was a rush job. We have been paying the price for 104 years since. Not one legal constitutional law has been passed by the U.S. Senate since 1913. This was the whole beginning of the takeover of our nation by the Communist Party and by the same people, the bankster cartels of the City of London, who supported the British side of the War for Independence. They're the same ones that did it to us to begin with, and in 1913, with the 17th Amendment and the 16th Amendment, which is the Income Tax Amendment, and the Federal Reserve Act, they regained authority, economic authority, over their colonies. They declared, at the time that Andrew Jackson kicked them out in 1834, they declared in a letter circulated among their imperial managers, as they called it, to be patient because they would regain economic control over their colonies by the year 1900. They were 13 years late. And they would regain political control over their colonies by the year 2000. How's that working out? We're getting awfully close, aren't we? All right, that's the first thing. The second thing is the Second Amendment. You all know that if you go to buy a gun from a firearms dealer, you have to fill out a Form 4473 and have a background check and all that sort of thing. That's the Brady Act. The Brady Act is flatly unconstitutional. It requires you to ask government for permission to exercise a right which government does not have the power to issue or deny. It requires you to give up your privacy. It's a violation of your Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Ninth Amendment, and 10th Amendment rights, as well as your Second Amendment right. You all need to get busy and start fighting for this and standing up for the principles our nation was founded upon. The Constitution is there to preserve and protect those principles, but it is worthless if we don't protect the Constitution. Thank you very much.
By the way, while you're mingling, looking at information, the 6-gallon hat has volunteered to come on up and play some more music. So enjoy yourself today.
Thank you for those of you who, after all that, oh my gosh, how bad it is, oh my gosh, I invite you to stick around a while, come gather closer. I would like to share with you some ideas about what we can begin to do right here to put us in a position locally to begin to be better together right here, right now, and also in a position to coordinate with other states that are also going in this direction. And
It's
then
good.
we'll get
It's the
inertia.
next step to getting
I
these
would like to
implants
see
in rather than
Gila County
it was
be a strong part of that.
eight shots.
Thank you. I'll be right here.
This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, to the Redwood Forest, to the Gulf Stream waters. This land